Hey humans, Connor here. Thank you so much for all the love you've shown us for Season 3 of MRAH and Rosenbaum Are Humans. Going forward, we'll be releasing new episodes bi-weekly. This allows us to spend more time polishing and preparing new episodes for you all. We have some wonderful episodes lined up and coming to you. We can't wait to hear what you think of them. Well, without further ado, please enjoy episode 72, A Time of Turmoil.
Hey everybody, this is MRAH and Rosenbaum Are Humans, a production of the Speculative Literature Foundation. I am Marianne MRAH.
And I am fellow human Benjamin Rosenbaum.
And today we thought we would talk about writing in a time of turmoil, just because it feels apropos. We are recording this on April 13th, 2025, which, may or may not be relevant to the discussion. So when I proposed this, Ben, what did you think about in terms of turmoil?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I it's funny because I had used the word turmoil actually even before you, before you told me what the title of the episode was, because I have a little whirlwind. I mean, I sort of have a little personal turmoil inside a larger turmoil. The personal turmoil is that I'm flying earlier than I thought to the U.S. to help with elder care. My dad's bouncing in and out of the hospital, and so that's all a bunch of upheaval, and I don't know if it, I'm sort of like heading towards that era of life where it's timed perfectly. So once the kids are stable adults, then you're talking about like, are you moving your parents into smaller housing and, unrolling the giant behemoth original abode.
Yeah, you got lucky. You didn't get sandwiched, right?
That's true. I managed to just squeak through.
Mm-hmm. Although there was a while where it was like small child, cancer, my mom's elder care and memory care facility issues, and then Kevin's mom got sick, Kevin's dad got sick, both passed, and our dog passed, and so it's not necessarily, I mean, it's better to have things sequential and not on top of each other, but also I was like, can I get 3 months with no crises?
Right.
Just
maybe you got them all out of the way. You were like, bring them on all at once, pack it all in, and then I get a break.
Yeah, except I think you would just I was like, when I was going through chemo, I could not have done anything on any of the other fronts. So,
Anyway, so that's a little. Well, you had far more, that's
relevant, right?
That's the Tootsie Roll Center, and then it's wrapped in the larger turmoil of. Well, it's a layer situation because there's a nougat filling of fascist takeover of the United States, and then a crunchy chocolate shell of climate collapse.
Oh, so my God!
It's a little confection of concentric turmoil. Yeah.
So, I was trying to say. It's funny. I literally, what are those desserts the little chocolate gold wrap desserts that confections that are oh my God,
like praline kind of things? Or?
No, but it's a particular brand that people give as gifts. God, I can't remember. My daughter likes them. Anyway, my dad gave her a whole bunch when he learned she liked them, and so we've been eating them every day, for this. So it's just kind of it's kind of funny that you used that before. It is literally a nut and hazelnut sort of thing, and then a crunchy thing, and a chocolate topping, and some crispy stuff on top. Yeah.
The praline of turmoil.
I know. People are listening to this and being like, it's blah, people. It's blah. How do you not know what the name of this is? But yeah.
We have different ones here. If there are different fancy chocolates that you give people in Switzerland anyway, so I don't know.
Yeah, in Switzerland you have probably many more options. But
Yes. I don't think there's a dominant fancy chocolate brand in Switzerland. Yeah. It's a very very open field. There's a lot of competition.
This is the one where you walk into the drugstore and it's the ones they have. It's the fancy chocolates.
Well, because anyway. We just went over to someone's house and we brought them like the the organic fair trade, like, chocolate praline thing, which you can find in any supermarket. It wasn't like, this is not like a Trader Joe's whatever
special
situation. It's like just the random supermarket.
Okay, so I realize we're rambling, but I think this is relevant to the topic because
it's a trauma response.
No, it is a trauma response, but also disasters are unevenly distributed. So it's kind of like right. In one place you have this particular brand of chocolate, another place you have a different brand of chocolate, or maybe several brands of chocolate.
Oh, bring in the metaphor home. I see.
This is what I'm saying. And so part of what is challenging right now with the national stuff in America is that some people are very aware of all of the disasters that are happening all the time because they are locked to the news cycle. Some are aware of particular ones. Some are only aware
and the news cycle's also like, I'm pretty locked to the news cycle, but like, there's not a lot about Sudan and Yemen. You know what I mean? It's like, there's a lot of disasters don't make the, right. Basically at this point, America's in so much turmoil that it's knocked Gaza off the front page. Never mind, 5 other things where people are dying.
Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah. And like, but just to finish, I was saying that, there's the people who are only aware of the American disasters that affect them directly, right? And then there are people who are sufficiently insulated by economic privilege or whatever that nothing is affecting them directly, and they're mostly not paying attention to news. They're not news consumers, etc. They are dealing with the rest of their lives, which may be full of turmoil in other ways, and so it makes it hard to have the conversations. I think that's, as a writer, that's, I think, one thing I think about is when I'm posting on social media, because I do nonfiction writing as well as fiction, right? So when I'm posting on social media, I try and make sure I include enough context for my posts so that the people who really have no awareness of something can still follow what I'm talking about. But it's tough because there are other people who know much more about it than I do who are also reading, right? Like if it's, an immigration issue or whatever it might be, right? So I don't know. Do you feel like that gets in the way when you're having conversations? Like maybe this is
my relationship to social media has shifted over the past 6 months, interestingly. Like in a way, it's sort of like, it feels like this sort of, and I mean, I think this is probably wrongheaded and personal and idiosyncratic and whatever, but it's sort of like, there was a period where social media started and was, even when it first started, I was suspicious of it, right? Like I was, like, because before my got involved in social media, there was the blogosphere, and I loved the blogosphere. I loved the fact that, those writers who sort of could figure out HTML were like sticking their words up and anybody could read them. And there was like, you had a blog roll of all your friends and you would click, you start your morning by like clicking through and seeing what your friends had to say and then commenting on their posts in their space where nobody was trying to sell you anything. And the people there were kind of self-selected to be people who were, interested in that. Not that you necessarily knew them all, but like the people who wandered by and stayed were a group was very specifically drawn to this because it was hard to find. Nobody was pushing it out of their nose. And, there was just a very high level of conversation, right, happening. And in the spaces where I went, like everything that anybody said was like really relevant and interesting and like long form and like extended conversations over periods, jumping from one blog to another that were really deep. And then social media showed up and it was like really fun. And the thing that was great about it was democratizing. So all of a sudden it wasn't just like writers who could figure out HTML. It was everybody and their grandma and all the people you knew from high school and whatever, which was amazing. You could get in touch with all these people that you were not in touch with because they were all on Facebook. But I already began to be suspicious of it circa like 2008 because it's kind of like, but we're ceding this like independent control that we have of our own spaces to like this centralized authority, right? And these companies.
I'll note here, I'll just interject, like I'm still paranoid enough about that everything I post of any substance to social media, I copy over to my blog. So the blog still exists. Nobody reads it, but it's there.
Well, that's what happened, is it became sort of a shadow. And I did it for a long time, and I still use like the only way I post on my blog is that I've like drafted, like workshopped it on Facebook essentially, and be like, okay, I think this is worth preserving, and then I stick it in the blog as like an archive. Because it's all going to go away. But it's sort of like, but it's kind of, so for a while, but I did feel like the lords enclosed our lands, right? Like it was like we're these yeoman, individual, like, I don't know, people like, hunting ducks in the commons of the swamps and like having their own plot of land. And then, the 16th century, they like, or 17th century, like they enclosed everything, and everything was, Lord so-and-so, who had always ceremonially owned the swamp, now actually drained it and turned it into, and kicked you off and you were a vagrant working in a sweatshop. Anyway, so which,
by the way, you could connect to current U.S. border policy, but go on.
Yeah, well, and in general, I think this thing that happened online was analogous to a thing that was happening in real life about the disenfranchisement of a lot of people and their conversion to, like, it's the digital version of sort of like gig economy, like all this converting of people to kind of serfs who serve at whim and have no durable and no corporate power of their own. I mean, I don't mean corporate in the sense of companies. I mean corporate in the sense of like communal, right? Like they don't have like their own, like they're each individuated atoms, and they're like serve at the pleasure of the mediating corporations. That's like the same model, right? It's Uber for whatever.
Wait, I'm going to pause you're going to keep going with these threads, but I just want to keep giving examples. So like when you say that, I think about like when I was originally blogging, it was gift economy, right? I was just giving away my words.
Yes.
And then Facebook basically turned me into a worker for them. They gave me Facebook for free. And in exchange, I now work for them and pay for the privilege because I'm also the consumer of the ads that they sell, right? So and helping to propagate that stuff out further, and
you're training their AI,
etc. Right? So like this idea, this is one of the things we just had a conversation in class. I had them read Cory Doctorow's Unauthorized Bread, which is a novella. It's available online for free. I recommend it to you all. But we had a conversation about how if you were not the purchaser, you are the product, right? They turned us into the product. Anyway, go on.
Yeah. Which is always, that's always the case. And I actually was looking through. I had a brief moment where I was like, I've got lots of writing energy. I'm going to start a short story or something. Then I wrote a couple short stories. But I was looking through my old, like, it's been a while because I've been in long projects. Like The Ghost in the Golem was 500,000 words, and The Unraveling took a decade. So it was like, I have all these old notebooks from like 2005 or something where I'm like scribbling down. At the time, I was just like filling pages with like hundreds of ideas that I've, obviously have never had time to do anything with. Sorry, and there's one page where I was
literally just reminded me I had an idea last night. I want to write it down. Okay, keep going.
Excellent. You write it down while I'm talking. That's what this podcast is for. Okay, listeners, I'll write down the idea you had last night. All right, so but I was brainstorming, I was sort of wrestling with this. I was very into, this was like the early 2000s. There was all this sort of like open source energy. And, that was kind of like this, down and out of the Magic Kingdom. And it's obviously influenced a lot of my work, like The Guy Who Worked for Money and The Unraveling. It's like this sort of like people will, unlike atoms, bits are meant to be shared. And so all these producers will like create everything. And there was really this sense that like, like Linux and Apache had just trounced all of the giants of Silicon Valley with like free stuff people were making in their spare time. There's just this enormous energy that's like the world is going to be free and shared. And I was sort of, there's literally this bit that's so funny where I'm in 2005 writing this idea, and I'm like, how will corporations respond? Like, what, do you know what I mean? Like, they're being kind of like outfought. Like, is there a way they could come back? And like, I'm sort of brainstorming in this writing page, like the story idea, brainstorming notebook. I'm brainstorming like, how could companies like come back and seize the value that everyone is sharing with each other for free? And, turns out I wasn't the only one brainstorming. I was doing it for a short story, but I think there were some whiteboards around the same time that were full of, anyway, they pulled it off. And then there was a period in my social media usage where it was really addictive. There was a period where they got everybody online. It was supercharged. It was not just like your couple of friends who wandered by. It was like if something went viral, right? It went to like you made a post and suddenly everybody was there, and there was this, like exhilarating, heady excitement of, this large crowd. Like anything you said, not most things weren't, but anything you said could potentially arrive before millions, kind of like if the gods of the algorithm selected it. But it wasn't the algorithm at the time was sort of tuned to just like get stuff out there. It seemed semi-random. It seemed like the gods of fate, right? And then, as Corey has extensively documented, there's just this long period where it got enshittified, where like the conversations got worse and worse. The algorithm got better tuned to like get people to doom scroll. And so everyone's in a state where when they're seeing your posts, they probably have been on social media way longer than they actually wanted to. And your post is contextless. Like what they're seeing is like, somebody got a new dog. My dad died. Here's my philosophical thought. Hey, remember this golden hit from the 80s? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, is there just this barrage of like weird emotional mashup of like, do you know what I mean? Of like things that if someone said to you in person, you would respond with like enormous, like, this is a terrible tragedy this person is suffering. I'm going to reserve the next hour to talk it to them. And instead you go from that to like old Roadrunner cartoon, and then to like political thing you should be angry about. And then to like, right. So the headspace in which you're having this conversation is so weirdly detached from anything and so numbed out. And at that point,
I'll pause and say that isn't really my experience.
Well, maybe the algorithm is kinder to you than it is to me.
No, I mean, I think it doesn't bother me because, so the scroll is going top to bottom, just as you described, right? But my experience of it is linear for various people I'm following and care about. So, like, for example, when I got cancer, and I was blogging about it this would have been 2014. Lots of people were clearly following my posts on a close to daily basis, and responding to them. So they were, like a serialized story. They were picking up the narrative every day, checking in, etc. It's harder to do that now because now the algorithm is much less likely to show you your friends, and you have to hunt for it. So that was a big change. But for a while, I feel
I do. Yes, it was a gradual enshittification. So I do feel like originally when I went on Facebook or Twitter, it was like, oh, these are I'm likely to see. Yes, I'm likely to be picking up the thread of a conversation, and it still requires some context switching, because this is a happy thing, this is a sad thing, this is a political thing, this is a personal thing. Like it's all like mishmashed together. But there is some sense in which it's like, yeah, I'm likely to run into the same story that I experienced, last time. And so, sure. And so there's that, but that continuity began to fall apart, and much more likely to see things from people that are just feel purely random, even if it's people I know. And I really hate this thing where somebody will mention somebody who's in my, outer periphery of people I know. And I will be like, oh shit, I think that person had some terrible personal tragedy, and I just scrolled by it. Do you know what I mean? Like if I'd heard about it in person, I would have had a very different reaction. But I'm like, is that the person? Wait, is that the person who who finished their thesis, or is that the person whose spouse committed suicide? I can't remember. Do you know what I mean? Like it's this very bleached informational context. Anyway, so that enshittification happened, and it began to get really aversive. And so I began to get to a point where I was like, because there had been a period where social media was super addictive when we were the customers, because the point of the VC cycle, where even if it's free, they need to build market share. So you're the customer in some provisional sense, because they're trying to suck as many people in as possible. At that point, it was really addictive, and I was spending way too much time on it, and I couldn't, I would be like, oh shit, I lost hours on Facebook, which can still happen. But at the time I was like, I was very susceptible to that. I kind of wanted to go check social media. And then I reached a point of reaction to enshittification where I kind of have to force myself to go on social media, where I'm like, oh God, I got a thing to promote, or I should check in, or I will drag myself. I'm like, okay, I'm doing this, and I will open it up. And then I will still sometimes lose more time than I want to. But for lots of reasons, or during the, when terrible at the beginning, I guess when the Gaza war started, and in the the series of terrible things that were happening since then, in the beginning of that period, I was like, well, I kind of hate the experience of being on social media, but I feel like it will be meaningful if I'm like posting and talking about things and,
well, that's kind of
advocating for something.
where I was getting to, like less about personal interactions on social media, which I think is kind of a different topic, and more about, if there is something political going on and you feel a responsibility to be part of that public conversation, what are the challenges that are getting in the way of that?
What shifted for me over the past 6 months is it
it
stopped feeling like a public conversation. Like at the beginning of that period, it did feel like I was posting, and I'm not saying that technology changed or whatever. It's probably just my own, but like I did feel like I'm doing some meaningful work here when I post something, and people are like, "Oh my god, I'm so glad you posted on this topic," and it's like it's connected with other people. And now, partly it's just burnout and everything that's going on, and partly it's literally the medium. Like it is hard for my post to even connect with the people, and the things that I'm seeing that I'm reacting to. I feel like very often I was reacting to kind of like even 6 months ago or a year ago, to sort of people seriously engaging with the like wondering what to do and asking questions to which I felt like maybe I had an answer, and I would like maybe comment in a thread, and then I would post my own thing, and then they might show up there. You know what I mean? Like there's some kind of back and forth conversation where it feels like, okay, well, among some disparate group of people, obviously mediated by the algorithm or whatever, like some kind of conversation is happening, some kind of thread here where it's like, I know, oh, this person, I can see that their position is evolving as we have this conversation over the course of many posts. And that is basically absent from my feed now. Now, if I was spending more time on Facebook, I'm sure I would find it to some extent. But since I already find it aversive and I got to push myself onto there, and most of the people, and I'm not saying like any of these individual people might conceivably have some reasoned position where if I was in their informational world, like it would, but most of them I don't know. Like the percentage of people who are my friends whose posts I see has plummeted. And the random people who are like 5 hops from me whose posts I see who are who are reacting in a way that the medium affords, which is sort of like acerbically snarky and disparaging and condemnatory of something, which I might agree with them about or not, depending on what the algorithm has seen fit to serve me. But like, if I disagree with them, the amount of effort it would seem to take to get to like penetrate into their informational bubble and like explain my position and like get them to come to somewhere just seems completely daunting. So it doesn't even feel like, I know like a year ago, I felt this moral pull where it was like, this is unpleasant, but it's a public conversation where I can make a difference if I speak. And now I'm just like, yeah, that doesn't seem like that's true. You know what I mean? You have a much bigger following, so your situation may not have eroded to the same extent.
Yeah, it hasn't. I mean, I'm trying to think about why I still feel like it's worthwhile and why I'm still able to have good conversations. I think there's three things. One is my purpose is not always conversation, right? So I've always thought about Facebook more as a broadcast and blogging as more of a broadcast medium than a conversational medium. So partly I just, I see, especially when I see a lot of confusion and sort of inaccuracies around something that's happening publicly, I do think it's valuable to take some time and like do a clarifying post. This is what's going on. Here are some resources. This is, who has good information on this. And I don't necessarily, I could turn off comments on that and I would still feel that it was potentially worthwhile to whoever Facebook chose to share to, right? So that's category one. And that could be one person, it could be 1,000 people, right? Like in theory, I have something like 15 to 20,000 people reach on Facebook, but in practice, it's often my posts these days, they used to get like 1,000 likes, reactions, whatever. And now it's more like 100, which I think is the deliberate throttling, right? So, but occasionally things will still like, every once in a while, one of those will bop back up to 1,000, right? Like it'll hit some invisible threshold and Facebook will start showing it to more people. And then I get a lot of reactions. So, interestingly, that happens more often, I think, with my poetry than anything else, which is kind of fascinating. So, but, so that's one category. Category two is the fact that I do have conversations on my personal feed. I moderate my feed pretty heavily. And so the kind of comments that you're talking about, I kind of discourage, and I don't allow personal attacks. You can argue the positions. I don't know. I tend to have pretty substantive conversations on my feed. If someone does attack someone, you get one warning, and if you do it again, you're blocked. And like that has, it's a very simple mechanism that has kept my feed pretty conversational, like the classroom conversations or conversations I'd have in my living room. You know, like I'm fine with a wide variety of viewpoints, but it has to continue to be productive. Oh, and if people start getting into it with each other, I also say, this is,
sure,
take it offline. I
Yeah.
don't need this in my living room,
Yep.
right? Like, and so like a little bit of moderation goes a long way. Also, learning that I could close comments on Facebook is also a very useful tool. You set things to only allow comments by friends and pages you mentioned, and that is effectively closing comments if you didn't mention any friends or pages. And so I didn't know about that mechanism for a long time. So that's also when things start getting heated. And if you don't have time to moderate something heated, I find that really useful. So that's category 2. And then category 3 are, and I realize this mostly for me applies right now to local things, is Facebook groups that are for local issues. And those, we just had a local election. It was very heated. A whole bunch of, surprisingly, conversations about anti-Semitism became major in that conversation, a major factor. And, that is, in fact, a lot of people I know or who know me, who have met me in person, et cetera, right? Like, and so it feels more like the early days of the blogosphere in that sense, right? And I realized as you were talking, I was like, I don't know of a space like that for science fiction fantasy authors. Like, it would be interesting, like if Scalzi wanted to start like a Facebook blog for like
Facebook group
authors having political conversations. Facebook group, right. Sorry, a group. Specfic authors having political conversations. No.
Well, this is a thing. I mean, I think first of all, I think the groups do operate differently, and I spend more time not so much in Facebook groups, but in like Discords and Slacks. Like, I think that's part of what's happening. Discord, Slacks. There's a continuum from like group chats to Facebook groups, passing through Discords and Slacks and things, which is like, I think that's an immune response by the citizens of the internet to what the companies have done. I mean, Facebook groups are still owned by Facebook, but they're kind of like not the same, like completely strip mined space. Like, your attention isn't strip mined in quite the same way yet. So they're at an earlier stage of enshittification, I guess. But like a lot of a lot of the Discord, Signal, Slack world is sort of, I think, this hunkering down because the broad algorithmic space sucks so much. I mean, part of what you're describing is there's two things. I mean, as you say, like, you and I used the medium differently. This is really, Facebook is a medium which you have used as a principle, like, since you started mirroring your blog to Facebook. It's like a thing you do.
Right.
Whereas it was always, that's like your online home. Whereas for me, as soon as social media started, it was always like a place to go chat, right? Like, I was using it like Usenet, not like my publishing platform. So, it's like you're an NPR host and I'm just like going to a party. And so that's a very different experience. And most of the times when I do publish something, it was very often in reaction. It wasn't that I necessarily was like, now I will compose the essay of the day. It was more like, I'm chatting with I'm waiting. It's a reactive mode because I'm waiting for the feed for somebody to say something intriguing that I can comment on. And then if I really want to expand it at length, I post my own thing about it and maybe draw them in. But that mode is kind of like been disabled. And the other thing is that there's just a scaling thing, because you're actually reporting a similar relative degree of enshittification. It's just that you always had 10 times the followers. So if you go from 1,000 comments to 100 comments, or 1,000 likes to 100 likes, that still feels like you're doing something. But if you had gone from 100 to 10, you might consider that would seriously impact your degree of interest. And more people are like me, right? Like, more people are in the 10, that it went from 100 likes to 10 likes category than from the 1,000 to 100. And I think that's just, anyway, I just think I'm not declaring social media dead, but it is like, is interesting how just recently it shifted. And I gotta say, some of it is like, I'm, I mean, as the title of the podcast say, I'm a human and my brain is susceptible to like, conspiracy thinking. And the problem with conspiracy thinking is there are real conspiracies in the world and you don't know which ones are true, right? So to some extent, there's a level, I don't really know to what extent the masters of social media are tuning algorithms to their, I mean, we know that they are to some extent, but like, it's obviously kind of like a magical thinking to be like, am I only getting 10 likes because they've decided that they don't like my political position and they're giving some, right-winger equivalent of Benjamin Rosenbaum more of the traffic? Could be, I don't know, maybe not. Like, but like, I think it's more likely that they're not fine-tuning it down that deep and that it's like just more the general algorithmic imperative of like stir up outrage and cause.
Well, yeah. And I would say like, yeah, it's not even, why do I have so many followers was mostly writing related and using it as that platform. Why I've kept gaining followers, I think, is less about writing and more about all the other things I post as well, right? Like, so, I post a lot of garden photos. I post a lot of pretty art photos, and Facebook loves to share that, right? So that also helps keep me high.
And so I think, I guess I'm saying, I don't actually think that I'm, that Facebook is sabotaging me. And like, I'm not nearly enough important for, even as a category, but I think there is some kind of algorithmic effect where it's like, we just want to drive engagement, blank engagement, whatever. Mm-hmm. And then engagement in the sense that they're measuring it turns out to be somewhat inimical to recent discourse. So like, so I'm not enough cute puppies and not enough angry flame wars. I'm somewhere in between those two bimodal distribution humps of the curve. I'm just saying stuff that I want to talk to people about, and that's not what
you could automate the posting of cute puppies.
Indeed, I could just automate it entirely. I could just have an AI, and I'm sure they're trying to sell me that. Like that, yes. In fact, their desired future is just chatbots talking to each other all the way down forever. Like, the humans will become
just listeners. I'm not recommending
I
this.
know it's an option. I know it's an option. I mean, well, actually, there's a. Oh, I heard of this Insidious app that just fools you. You get it for your kids. Famify, I believe it's called. Where if your kids are sad because they don't have any friends on social media, it invents hosts of like self-consistent AIs that pretend that that they love everything your kid posts. Anyway, so yeah, it's a dark timeline.
Okay,
anyway,
so we've covered quite a lot about social
media. Sure, I don't know why we went on to that. Anyway, writing in a time of turmoil was the topic.
Yeah. Well, I think I want to jump off. Right, I want to jump off what you were saying about the paranoia around whether Facebook is showing your stuff or not, to the more general paranoia about
I guess just to close that, the last thing I was saying, that is, it's not that I really necessarily believe it, but it is this level of uncertainty, which also degrades the willingness to go there, because it's like, do I even trust, like I'm part of the general 2025, like my trust in institutions, like everyone's and Facebook is one of the institutions, right? Which like, my trust is at an all-time low, but you want to talk about general paranoia.
Well, I want to talk about, like, if you had asked me a month ago if I was if I worried at all about posting my political opinions on Facebook, I would have said no. I wasn't concerned about it. And, I also was not concerned about having political discussions with my phone in the room or in my friend's Tesla. She worries about that a lot. And I still think that's probably excessive, because she's not planning a revolution. She's just bitching, right, about Trump. And I doubt they're paying attention to that level of stuff, right? But this past week, I've gotten to the point, watching The Nation and watching the moves that the administration is doing, where like about a month ago, I started making sure that if I fly, I have my passport with me, which I never worried about. I'm an American citizen now. I'm a naturalized citizen. I was a green card holder for a long time, came in legally, et cetera, and so on. And I just wasn't worried about it. It was a hassle going in and out of the country because I had a green card, but when the Patriot Act passed, I had young children, and I thought, if I get, this is right after 9/11 for those who are younger and maybe don't remember this. My students have no idea, right? So like Patriot Act passed, and one provision was that if you, as a green card holder, were convicted of a crime, you could be deported immediately without anything else, right? And even if it later turned out that you had not committed the crime or whatever, you were deported. So it would be hard to come back. And so that kind of pushed me to actually go through and like spend the money to get my citizenship, because it's not free. And I was just, had been a pretty broke grad student not long before that, right? So, but now I had a job and, steady income. So I did it. And then I kind of didn't worry about my status for a while. And I didn't worry about speaking publicly. When Trump came into office, my husband and I had a conversation about our jobs and whether we were concerned about, we both work for the state, we're professors at the University of Illinois. Are we concerned about getting fired? And he said, he's a math professor with tenure. He's going to be like the last to go down, right? Like if that actually happens, they're not going to come after them last. I am non-tenure track. I've been there a long time. My department likes me, but I'm in the English department, and I'm infinitely replaceable, right, in some sense. And so, he said, if they're looking to make, well, from the university's point of view, I don't know, there's a constant stream of aspiring people who want to be English professors, right? So, he's like, well, if their budget gets cut and they feel the need to do belt tightening, you might lose your job. And I was like, okay, what does that do for our finances? We can cope. I would focus on other things. I'd probably write more, make more money writing, etc. So I didn't feel the need to stop speaking in concern about that. I have quite a few colleagues who, at that point, did tone down what they were saying publicly for fear of being targeted, right? And now this, just a couple days ago, Kevin and I had this conversation where like, I don't think things are going to get this bad, but let's say we are on the fascist path and it has been moving very fast. And let's say we don't take back the House in the next election and we then aren't able to slow things down.
Or that doesn't slow things down.
Or that doesn't slow things down. But yeah. That's another great thought. Okay. Anyway,
I'm not saying it won't. I'm just saying.
Would we? I know. I can't hold too many terrible possibilities in my head at the same time, or I just like I get paralyzed, which is relevant to this conversation. But we have the conversation like, would we leave the country at that point if it felt like the chance of my being disappeared for speaking loudly had increased, right? And because yes, I'm a citizen now, but I wasn't born in the US, so maybe that puts me next in the next pool that they go after, right?
Sure.
Especially if I'm out there writing political screeds and people are actually listening to me. I really worry about Heather Cox Richardson. I mean, like, I so worry about her right now. So, so then I was like, well, I can reactivate my Sri Lankan citizenship for $5,000 at the moment,
because everything's going great there. I guess it's going better. I guess politically it's going a lot better.
Politically, it's going a lot better, right? So, like they have issues, but if you have money and you're coming from overseas, you're very insulated from it all, or you can be, right? We can have a very quiet, lovely life. And in general, money insulates, right? And that's the other thing. Kevin was like, well, that's pretty far, but we have enough money. We probably can manage, if we sell our house and so on, to do the like golden visa to Portugal or move to Mexico. There are places that if you have money, you can just move there. And until they close the borders, right? And I was reading some prediction thing that was like a timeline of fascism and like, okay, they've done this, and like 2 steps down in the timeline is closing the borders. And I was like, oh, what happens when they don't let Americans come and go, right? Like, so anyway, that's where I am now. I'm like, suddenly this week, I'm actually, for the first time in a long time, feeling some political constraints around my writing. And the last time I had to answer these questions was in my early 20s when I was writing erotica, and Congress was considering the, what was it called? No, no, it was they were legislating whether they were going to try and keep sex off the internet, right? And I was, at that point prominent as a sex writer, if you were paying attention to that kind of thing. And so I was interviewed by the Philadelphia Inquirer and some local news stations, and I was on, radio shows and whatever, and a bunch of us who were on a mailing list together of erotica writers, sex writers, were having this conversation about, like, if this passes, are we willing to keep our sites up and risk going to jail, right? And at the time I thought about it, and I was a single young person, and I was like, yeah, I could handle it. But now I have kids, I have, responsibilities, and it's complex. And also, like, you read the reports of what the people are enduring in these detention centers, and I'm like, even the ones who, like, are held for a week and placed, they get a steel frame to sleep on with no blanket, no mattress, some of them don't get water for days. And like, I would not handle that well for long. A couple days I could cope, but I don't know. That's where I am. So it's actually, I haven't muzzled myself yet. I'm still at the point where if I even think about it, I'm like, fuck them.
That's
sorry,
the right
listeners.
Do not apologize. That is the necessary.
Yeah, but yeah. So I'm still at the point of, I'm just going to push through, but I can see the chilling effect is starting to be felt for me. And I know a lot of writers have been feeling it for quite a while. And a lot of writers are not in as insulated and privileged a position as I am, right? Like, they're dependent on their income. They have families who are dependent on their income, etc. So I turn it over to you. Those are my freak out thoughts. I'm not so given to freaking out, and so the fact that I'm there, I'm usually the optimist, and I'm like, it'll be fine. For most of us, it'll be fine. But...
Yeah, I mean, the question of muzzling is very interesting. I mean, it's funny because I was talking to a friend of mine who I grew up with, and he's a straight white guy, so straight white goyish guy. So, like, since he got rich, because when we were young, I was rich and he was not. Mm-hmm. But like now that our positions have reversed, mm-hmm. It's like I've just been, like, strictly speaking, more marginalized than him net. You know what I mean? And then it was just, let's just like he's the ally, And so I just realized, I've had some conversation with him where he made reference to that or something. And then afterwards, like, that just feels wrong somehow suddenly. And I was like, oh, wait, he lives in America since January 20th. Like, being an American has flipped from being obviously it's still privileged in a lot of ways, but being an American citizen as opposed to an American, in the Trump administration or something, has all of a sudden become like a class where I'm like, oh, I have a Swiss passport. I have way more privilege than he does. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden. So, I mean, I'm super insulated, right? I mean, my family's there, but like, I'm already set up to be a dissident in exile. I don't know, but I sort of, so easy for me to say. I definitely share the reaction of like, well, and it's ironic because I'm like, fuck them, they can't muzzle me. And then, like, I spent the first part of the podcast saying, like, I don't even post on social media because fuck that shit. So it's like, that's of course another way to, arguably another way to silence people. I sort of feel like, I mean, either it's a way to, obviously there is some, it's not the only way to communicate. I think there's two dangers here. One of which is losing the only means of communication that we do have because we're disgusted or because we're scared. And then the other is like letting them convince us that is the only way to communicate, right? Like, I'm spending more time on Slacks and Discords and phone call, group phone calls and things where I feel like there's some chance of actually communicating at length, instead of shouting into the void, what feels increasingly like an inhospitable void. But I do have the same reaction of like, well, fuck them, they can't shut me up. And at the same time, it's like, I'm too small a fish, right? But I think there is this, everybody's, there's, I don't know if we talked about this the other time we talked about recent politics, but I don't know if I already talked about like the pros and cons of the Nazi analogy, right? When I say analogy, it's not an analogy. They're Nazis. Elon's literally doing the Nazi salute. They are Nazis, but or wannabe weasel Nazis. But I like when the pranksters in the UK and Germany put up posters that like fake Tesla ads that say 0 to 1939 in 6 seconds, right? Like, that's funny. It's trenchant. We should be calling them Nazis. But I also worry that there is and this is always my thing about the Holocaust and World War II in general, is that our minds, it's like this, there's this black hole there where our minds are pulled to that as, especially Americans, as the example, like the analogy. Like which is, I think, danger, because I think there's this danger of this binary, like it's either freedom and we're fine or Hitler. And it's like, it's actually, there's like you don't have to go back that far, because what's happening now in America is part of a general trend over the past 15 years where country after country has succumbed to autocratic rule along the same playbook. Like, right? Like, Trump is literally like, Putin and Erdogan and Modi and Netanyahu and, like Orban. Like, there's like a playbook for illiberal autocratic takeovers. And first of all, it doesn't always work. They just beat it in Poland, right? Poland had totally gone in this very Trumpist direction. And then there was this like concerted effort by the people, and they, had enough, even though they were cheating on elections, whatever, they had enough people power that they tossed them out. And it is possible. And it's something what, you know what I mean? So I sort of feel like the danger, the good thing about the Nazi analogy is people who are falsely complacent, you can get them to wake up and be like, oh shit, this is real. Like, they actually are trying to take away our liberties. They actually don't give a shit about human lives, etc. Or they're whatever. They're driven by their own ideological corner. They definitely feel like some lives are more important than others and whatever. And it's not only one they. I want to emphasize that, like, the other thing is, I'm not talking about everybody who voted for Trump. I'm talking about Trump. Because both, there are two big unruly coalitions, and there's lots of why people would vote against Trump or would vote for Trump, and you got to think about all of the different fish swimming in the pond. But I guess where I'm going with this is the analogy can be demotivating, because if you think that it's the Nazis, it's a little like framing climate change in terms of like, we reach 1.5 and we're all fucked. Because now that we're definitely heading to 1.5, the way that can backfire is for people to go, oh well, I guess we're fucked. Like, there's a lot of different levels of fucked. There's a lot of different levels of autocracies. There's a lot of different, and the analogy to like the most extreme one that had the most dramatic rise and fall, in which they literally just murdered, millions of their own citizens and then were totally annihilated. Like, that's not how it usually happens. It's usually a gradual erosion of freedoms that leads to real harm, and which is people often come back from by like the ongoing grueling resistance of civil society, right? If we thought less about the Nazis and more about a lot of places in South America and Eastern Europe and so on, or even like Spain under Franco, like the countries that have been through this. Yeah, like in the 70s, there were two autocracies in Western Europe, right? Like, I think Spain and Portugal were both like under autocratic strongmen who, rounded up dissidents, and now they're not. So it's like, how do you, so I feel like there has to be this middle position of like, you can't be in denial that it's happening, but also you let them win if you're like, oh my God, they have all the power. Because one of the things that I think is, and I may have said this before again, but one of the things I think is important to hang on to that helps me, I'll just say this last thing. The thing that I find helpful, in a weird way, is that autocrats are by definition, autocratic regimes are by definition kind of incompetent. Because, particularly in the situation that we're talking about under Trumpism, because in Trump's first administration, there were lots of people who were basically like-minded, basically agreed with lots of his ideas, but had their own political aspirations and careers and reputations at stake. And so even Jeff Sessions, who, was not agrees far more with Trump than with me about most things, would draw the line sometimes and be like, no, we can't do that. And so it didn't work out for Trump. And so for what he wanted to do. And now he has surrounded himself with sycophants who are so far out of the mainstream and so without any. It's like it's not an accident or an idiosyncratic incompetence that a Fox News host is running the Department of Defense. He has to do that. He has to have people who could or only depended on him. They cannot say no. And what that means is they're not really very competent, and they're actually busily sabotaging their own power to do anything. So the thing about resisting them is, yes, any one of us who speaks up, could easily get detained. But if they're playing whack-a-mole with everybody, they don't actually have that much capacity to play whack-a-mole. They're not actually that good at this. And just obstructionism, which I think has to happen on a lot of levels, on legal levels, on extra legal levels, on, I am very happy. I mean, I feel like everybody, I don't hate the frustration with the Democrats and why aren't they doing more. But I also think that on the one hand, I think it's great that it motivated people to go into the streets, because we need people in the streets, that they feel like the Democrats are doing enough. So keep at it, keep yelling about it. Also, I have some sympathy with the fact that they are we are operating in this space where our job is to win the midterms. And that's not, I don't think winning the midterms is sufficient. But I think it's necessary, right? I mean, maybe not necessary, but it's definitely a project some people should be working on, and they're well positioned to do so, right? And so it's there's more than one. People should be challenging into the courts, even though they're sometimes going to ignore the courts, but they don't always ignore the courts. There's friction, and some of the people, Trump may be like, fuck it, we're gonna, but he still has to send some young lawyer to deliver the thing. And that young lawyer has in the back of the mind, I could get disbarred. If this doesn't work out, if Trumpism doesn't work out, the Bar Association is going to kick me out of my ass. And those are frictions. None of it solves it. You can't stop Trump in any of these ways, but it's frictions. And eventually their power grab is very provisional. It is blocked by states. It's blocked by, I would like more general strikes and general, you know what I mean? The people in the streets is great. We need that. But it's more, I think it's also people think there's a magic bullet where one big, day that everybody goes out. But this is usually a war of attrition between civil society and autocrats, I
mean, I think various things I want to respond to there. One, I love your climate change analogy, I think is right on. When you were talking before, I was thinking about those Amitav Ghosh lectures that he gave, talking about why is it that fiction is so bad at really writing about climate change, because it's so huge and terrifying that it's, when you read about it, it seems like fiction. It doesn't, it's not, it doesn't feel real. And I think that for me, my main difficulty with the Nazi analogy is that I admit an immediate visceral reaction, which comes of having lived in a stable society for a long time, of well, we're not going to be actually building death camps, we're not going to be shoveling people into ovens, right? That sounds like something out of a fairy tale, and I know it happened, but it can't happen again, right? Now we know better. And then of course now you see what they're doing, shipping people to these prisons in El Salvador, and I'm like, oh well, look, the death camps.
Yeah, well, and they would, would.
So but yeah, they would. They do. They are, and they will happily.
Well, and it's not, and it's not. I mean, it's not the death camps yet. But there's this arc, right? This is how they start. This is how it started.
Yeah. Well, it's definite. We definitely have concentration camps again. You would think after World War II and after what we did with the Japanese in America, you'd think we would have learned, and no.
I mean, again, you mentioned the Patriot Act. Essentially, I think we crossed this bridge under Bush, and once we agreed that it was okay to detain American citizens without trial indefinitely, or really anybody in the world, but particularly once we even took that right away from citizens, even though we did it to a very small percentage of people, it's you've already established the precedent. We're living in the shadow of Bush, of George W. Bush. That's how this started.
It's like you can't be
a little bit pregnant. Like once you've decided that people don't have that right, even if you allow most people to have that right, it's not a right, And once you take away the right from anybody, it's not a right, It's a privilege. And so Trump is just taking that machinery to its natural conclusion, which, to be fair, I mean, it's not like Obama and Biden didn't use that machinery once it was there. Like they never stopped. Right. Nobody ever. Also, the Democrats didn't stop. Like once you give the central authority power, they're gonna. And in fact, they were better at deporting people, really. Obama and Biden were better at deporting people because they were trying to do it in some kind of rational way that people had more buy-in, where they were trying to actually identify people who would be likely to be criminals or be likely to whatever, instead of because Trump is maximizing theater and cruelty, he's actually probably deporting fewer people. But I mean, or he was. Now maybe the machinery is geared up to where they're deporting a lot more people because it's so blanket. But anyway, whatever.
And then the other things you said, there are a couple other things I wanted to highlight. So one is when you talk about paralysis, I think the average person right now, what I'm seeing is people don't know what to do, right? And they're looking for direction, and they're looking for some sense of there are useful things one can do. So, so things so I think when we call out things like, yes, it is still useful. It's incredibly useful that the judges are pushing back. It is useful when people resign in protest. It's useful, all
the
of
New York
things.
City Education Department. That was beautiful. That we need a million things like that. Because if it's one state, they can crack down on it. But if every state education department is like, "Fuck you, see you in court," which is basically what they said. That's
Well, and I don't know if you saw. I think it's Rutgers that just proposed a multi-university alliance that if they come after one of us, we all put our resources towards any money that's needed for defense of our students, etc. So we'll see who signs on to that. But that kind of thing is potentially very powerful. I do think, and you mentioned people being out in the streets, and I've seen various numbers given as the tipping point, 14 million, 19 million. I don't know what actually, I don't know where that number is coming from as the tipping point, but there seems to be, from people who know more about poli-sci than me, that there is a point at which if the demonstrations get big enough, that they will start having an effect. And my experience of doing any kind of work really is that accretion is a powerful factor. So you do have a demonstration on April 5th, 5 million people turn out. You have one 2 weeks later, maybe 8 million people turn out. So I think it's important that people understand, even if you're not seeing a direct effect from any given protest, the fact that they are growing, and they will continue to grow, presumably, if you continue to have them. When you reach out to your friends and you're like, hey, what do you want to do next weekend? And their response is, well, I'll be at the protest, of course, right? That's powerful. That is them
that's what we're doing.
Oh, everybody I know is going to be at the protest.
And that is what happens in countries where it just starts steamrolling and those massive protests happen, is partly because it becomes the thing to do. It's the thing to,
Right. And Americans are not practiced in this, right? The French will protest at the drop of a hat.
Yeah. Burn tractors in the middle of the street, stop traffic.
So we need to learn these skills. We're learning them, right? So fine. And then the last thing I wanted to point out is what you said about friction. I recently read an interesting thing about, and I'm sorry, I'm not remembering any of the details, but one practice the dissidents had at a point where they were being rounded up a lot was filling their pockets habitually with a whole bunch of random stuff, because it slowed down. They had to log it all. They had to process and log it all, and it slowed down the process. So I thought that was fascinating. Thinking about what are the ways that we don't have to invent them.
Exactly.
Other people have done this. Let's study and learn, what did dissidents do? Because that's who we are now, and we have no practice in it, and we need to know what's effective, right? So that's kind of what I'm looking for right now in terms of writing in a time of turmoil. I'm looking for those clarifying voices. That's why I appreciate Heather Cox Richardson so much, because I know some pieces of history really well, and others I don't know at all. And she is bringing that historical perspective and putting what's happening now in a larger context. But I also really appreciate the the activists on the ground who have strategies, and especially I'd like to call out here the Black activists who have been dealing with a lot of this shit their entire lives, because Black America has always had to deal with much more.
It was very
underreported,
right? But I think there was a big Black church protest of like boycott of Target that started, like because of their backing off of DEI policies.
Good for them.
And like Black church is a hell of a, like, if there's an institution in American life which knows how to coherently take action over time.
And I just saw something from some alumni, Black alumni, sent back a thing to their fundraising people at the college saying no DEI, no money, stop asking me, you know, and in like big letters. And I was like, and someone was commenting in response to that, if all the Black athletes at the Division I schools refused to play, that's the
same amount of budget shortfall. As Trump's point, as the research. We should post in the show notes. I have there's a great post by one of my favorite internet rabbi, Daniel Rutenberg, which was like a really long list of all the like things you could practically do right now. And I think that's very useful. And I think that I find it useful to a couple of things. One is I think it's useful to frame it as I think Americans particularly, because we're not used to having to do this, right? And we're like, I mean, the scale of protests, even in a big protest in America, is relatively small compared to something like France or Israel. Like in Israel, it was paused during the war, but because of the Netanyahu's judicial takeover, there was like literally like a fifth of Israel was on the streets. And now there are also protests, again, like now Netanyahu's ability to make the war a silencing effect is actually lower, and has actually degraded. Like that for a while there was like, well, there's a war, but now there's big protests again against the war, and the more so than everyone else is ignoring it. But in Israel and Palestine there are protests. There's also protests in Gaza against Hamas, which is really rare. Anyway, I mean, because it's so dangerous. But Americans are unpracticed at it. And I think we have a Hollywood idea. Like we're sort of trained to have like short attention spans and to sort of think that a dramatic gesture by a small group is going to make the narrative, the American narrative of like of that stuff is like, well, like King did Selma and the March on Washington and then freedom. You know what I mean? I mean, like ignoring that was like a struggle that started in the right after Reconstruction, really, and like was building from the 20s and the 30s, and like those people in this protest were like, this was their 15th year. But the people at Selma, the NACP lawyers, that
and also they did not have clarity, right? I loved the graphic novel March, because it lays out the arguments that they were all having at the time, right? Of like, should we do this? Should we do that? And it's
exactly. You're only going to know in retrospect. It's all very simple what the right strategy was, but actually it's different every time. But what you need is a robust arguing ecosystem of a lot of people trying a lot of different things. But the way to think about it is that I think the way to think about it is that it's a war of attrition. And the autocrats' powers are actually pretty limited. The autocrats' capacity to manage a bunch of things at once is not that great because it's staffed by incompetence, by necessity. And so their ability, what they can do very effectively, because they don't care about any of the previous constraints, is they can do the shock and awe thing where they have a bunch of things that are like, you just can't do. You can't fire civil servants, and then they do. Like they just do a bunch of stuff where they say, and because I said so, and they run roughshod of the law. And that's very frightening and overwhelming, which is what it's designed to do. And it will work if it shuts everyone up, because everyone's like, oh my God, they're so powerful. But it's actually a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of weakness on some level. They can't pass any laws, so they're just doing everything by executive order. They can't actually win in the courts, so they're ignoring the courts. But they're kind of half-assedly ignoring the courts and sort of pretending they're not. They're not at their... They don't really have, like, they're trying to build their capacity, but their capacity is limited. And it's a war of attrition. And if you can degrade their capacity, like they will collapse, And so the things that we tend to think it's like, well, we need to get this particular like big protest where everyone comes out and then the government will fall. But like, we don't have a parliamentary government, so it's not going to fall, right? Like on that level, there's not going to be a vote of no confidence. Like, so it takes longer. It's different than that. But like there's a lot of things that matter. Like, frankly, the Tesla protests matter. Like, hurting Elon Musk in the pocketbook matters. Like, everybody trying to unload their Teslas as fast as possible and like calling them swastika cars matters. And the stock market crashing over tariffs matters. Like, but also just taking care of the people who are being affected. Like the like mutual aid matters. And and it's not just that you're being nice. It's like that actually is like a weapon. Like, to the extent that if you actively resist like the process of dividing people and separating them out, and if you are actually going down and whatever, like going on LinkedIn and trying to find jobs for the federal employees, or like looking for people who might get deported and offering them help, like going to volunteer with Immigrant Aid, like whatever.
Well,
like
when he was elected the first time, right, and he first started trying to deport people, a whole bunch of lawyers went out to O'Hare and were helping them write things to keep them from being deported. And I'm not a lawyer, but I chipped in for the pizza delivery, right, like to keep them fed, right, like, so things like that, like even those small little things. We have to wrap in a few minutes. I think I want to kind of, my last thought on this for now is, I think it starts, okay, and this is maybe coming from my Catholic upbringing, which I'm not religious anymore, but something stick in your head, right? And so like in Catholicism, despair is considered a sin, a mortal sin, because not just being depressed, but like the complete abandonment of any hope is, and so I don't really think in terms of sin anymore, but I think that is something to be wary of. And I think because when you really despair, you give up hope, you stop fighting, and we need everybody to keep fighting. And to bring it back to writing, when I sit down, and whether I'm writing an essay or a poem, and Connor, let's link the couple of political poems I wrote since all this started in the show notes. I'll get them to you. But I find, for me, it helps me not despair. It, like, the process of writing about it and thinking about it, I tend to come to a more hopeful, clear position. I'm in a muddle before I start writing. And when I write, I'm like, okay, this is what's going on. This is what we can do next. And I feel better at the end of it and more capable of continuing the battle.
Well, and it's not just inward bound. I mean, I think again, I think we should look to the wisdom. I think we should not just always obsess about the Nazis, but we should look to the wisdom of like successful political movements against autocracy throughout the world, not just, like and if you look at those movements, like, art is a hugely important part of them. And not just political art, didactic political art is part of it, but just like nourishing people's souls is like a huge part of like the autocrat wants to make your world small, right? It wants to be the only thing. It wants to be the only voice, and your reaction is just fear and despair. And like really just broadening the frame, and like even just being aware of all the other things that there are, and that this is a small voice. This is somebody's got themselves on the seat of power, and they want to be the boss of the world, and they're very dangerous. They can do a lot of harm, but like they aren't everything. They have this idea they want to be everything in the universe, but like really they're small. And I think that art can particularly do that, broaden the frame and characterize.
Yeah. Have you read Becky Chambers' Monk and Robot books?
No,
chance? I think you would love them. The first book opens with they're set in the far future on another planet, but the first book opens with a young person who has to get the fuck out of the city, is I believe the first line. But they set up as a tea monk, and this is almost like a therapy practice. Like, they wander around the villages making tea for people and listening to their problems. And at the end of, they listen to the problem, they give them some tea, right? So
that would be great. If you want to do something, making tea for people and listening to their problems is
well. So let me finish. So, and then in chapter 2, you meet the robots, which is why it's Monk and Robot, and there's a whole thing about AI and humans and climate change, and they're very comforting books. They're very quiet, peaceful books. I recommend them to you all. But I had my students read the first chapter for class on Friday. And instead of doing the standard kind of lit analysis that we would normally do in class, and I didn't have the energy to pack up tea and bring it, otherwise I would have. But I basically did tea ceremony in class where I went around the tables, they were sitting at tables, and I said, this is what we're doing today. I'm going to be asking you, how are you? And listening to your responses and telling you what kind of tea I would make for you if I had tea. And that's what we did for the whole class. And they were doing it for each other as well at the same time as I was moving around. And it was awesome. I got to know them better. They all kind of initially responded with, "Oh, I'm fine."
Yeah.
And then you wait a moment, and then like, actually, I'm pretty stressed about this particular class, or whatever, or my health is really an issue right now, or whatever it might be. And it's not like I could fix their problems, but there's a value there,
of
right?
course.
So.
Yeah. No, that's 100%. Like, if there's one thing I honestly, like, it's funny that you say that, because I'm kind of like, yeah, if you want this is part of my reaction to, like, the shouting the void of the social media. It's like, yes, I actually think the most bang for the buck, if you want to end Trumpism, is for me to just walk outside and, like, listen to people and make tea for them. That's underappreciated. If everybody, like, because I think despair is such a weapon against the public good. Okay, so we're coming to the end. I think that I think we should have this be a two-parter called Writing in a Time of Turmoil. And part one is turmoil and part two is writing. Because I think actually I would love to have a part two where we actually talk about both, like, what it's like to write right now and like and
we want to give you some good writing on this topic. So
and one thing I do want to say about that, I just have this memory. I don't know how relevant, and it's somewhat relevant, but I remember right after the Berlin Wall fell, I was in 1990. I was in Europe. I was in Italy, and I went to go. I just was fascinated by the phenomenon. I was like, I'm living through history, and I hopped on a train to go to meet somebody who I didn't know, like a friend of a friend who I got hooked up with in Prague. And so I was hanging out, and speaking of writers and like their significance in dissident movement, Václav Havel is like this playwright had just become like just taken over from the autocratic communist regime had fallen in Poland, and this was Chomsky Foru was the new party in power. And so anyway, I was going around, and one thing that was funny to me, because I had grown up with these like legends of just a spy movie version of the Cold War, and it was just really funny, interesting to see what it was actually like. And I realized that my image of dissidents was like, I don't know, people starving in the gulag, like these people who were like Solzhenitsyn, like this kind of like, which is not that there weren't those people, but I asked about dissidents, and it was so funny because she was, my friend who was my age, is like a 20-something, was like, oh yeah, the dissidents. I mean, they're all like, we had them in our high school. And I was basically like, oh, they're punks. You're just talking about punks. Like, it was like, everybody knew who the dissident kids were, and they got hassled by the police, and maybe they got, but they basically were like, you know what I mean? It was just like, a fabric of life, was like, oh yeah, the people who, aren't okay with this and keep talking about it. And I was like, oh, that's so, you know what I mean? It was like not this overly dramatic, like everybody is in solitary. Of course, some people did, but like a lot of it was just this grassroots, ground level grinding resistance, which is part of what eventually brought about that change and most such changes. I don't know. It's just kind of like, I was like, oh, we call those punks. Like, like we have them too. Anyway, so So I think
that's a good place to wrap. If you're interested in reading more dissident punk stuff, Margaret Killjoy leaps to mind. So
we'll drop some links in the show notes.
Yeah, well, we'll have. I think next episode we're hoping to have a whole lot of recommendations for y'all. So
yes, and I think we should talk about like what's going on with our writing and how a time of turmoil is influencing it, and what kind of choices we're making, and what less abstractly. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
All right. So
thanks, everybody. This has been Mo and Raj and Rosenbaum are humans.
Yes.
And
stay human, particularly now.
Yeah. I would agree. Even if you're a robot.
Stay what you are. Or not. Guys, turn into something else. That's fine too. But flourish.
We're not very good at giving people instructions on what to do with their lives.
Hey humans, don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more, so you don't miss future episodes of MRAH and Rosenbaum Are Humans. Leaving us a good rating also helps us reach a wider audience. If you want to reach us directly to ask questions or continue the conversation, you can email us at mrah@speclit.org. This podcast is hosted by Marianne Mohenraj and Benjamin Rosenbaum. Editing and show notes by Connor Nevitt. Music composed by Thor Bremer, and cover art by Stephanie Bailey. Thanks for tuning in to Mohenraj and Rosenbaum Are Humans.